Hey Ben, so it's great to have you on the show. Ben has 7 years at Google working on a mix of ML and performance engineering and saved hundreds of millions in infra costs. With that success, he started Espresso AI with co-founders in search that uses Gen AI to optimize compute and raised $11 million. That's not something everyone can say. Great to have you on the show, Ben. Can you give your own version of the intro?
Yeah, absolutely. Really excited to be here. Thank you for having me. Um, like you said before this, I was working in infrastructure in Google on a team of pretty senior engineers, and we were just doing a lot of systems optimization and a lot of code optimization. And we shipped projects that, on a fairly regular basis, saved Google tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. The idea for Espresso AI came out of playing around with ChatGPT and Copilot and trying to figure out, okay, these tools clearly understand code at a deeper level than any automated tooling has before. What new things can they do? What can we do now that wasn't possible without this technology? And one guess that I had, based in part on some research I worked on with Google Brain while I was on search, was, well, maybe we can just automate my job. Maybe we can automate some of the code optimizations that we do. Um, so that was the original idea. Was fortunate enough to have a couple of my friends from Google Search join me. Both good friends and like some of the best engineers I've ever worked with. Um, and yeah, we started working on that idea. The initial plan was to use LLMs to optimize C++. Um, in what's going to be a bit of a theme, I think, during the rest of the talk, we went out and started talking to users before writing code, and pretty quickly found out that there is a ton of demand for optimizing data warehousing, and specifically Snowflake is something that kept coming up over and over. So we decided to start with optimizing SQL instead, and that kind of worked. So we're here a year later. We have our first, 10 or so customers, and yeah, kind of just building out more features and a better product.
That's amazing. I can tell you that there are plenty of startups that I've encountered that have raised that seed round. And it's just really, really hard to get those first customers. But it sounds to me like things are flowing really well for you. Um, I'm curious, how did you do that validation? How, you said pretty quickly you understood that you want to focus on Snowflake and that's where the pain is. What was your process like?
Yeah. So this is not my first startup. And I think my takeaway from kind of years of experience at not having particularly successful products was just go talk to users. This is something that I did YC with a previous company, and every week we would go talk to the partners, and the feedback was always like, "Get out of your apartment, go talk to people. You need to talk to your customers." And so that's what we did. We started asking, "Hey, what are your, we think we can optimize cloud spend. What are your biggest costs? What are you stressed about?" And we just kind of kept hearing the same thing over and over. We One of my mentors and one of the advisors to our company is Tasso Argyros. He's the CEO of Action IQ. And he put it really well in an early conversation. He was saying, if you have technology that you think can save people 20, 30% on your Snowflake bill, you can probably walk into any office building in New York and just like say that in the lobby and get invited up for a meeting with the CTO. And this is turned out to be way less of an exaggeration than I thought it would be. The early interest that we had was from, friends of friends and just kind of posting to mailing lists and talking to, a few people at a conference. And pretty quickly people started having serious conversations with us. We were, on meetings with uh, quite senior people at established companies. And at the time there were four of us renting a hacker house in Mountain View. Um, not like clearly not like a well-established company, and still like public companies sent us data to see if we could help. It's If you find something that's really a big enough problem, you get sort of a qualitative shift in how excited people are to talk to you and for you to help them.
I'd like to, first of all, I love this story. I'd like to dive in even more into the validation, right? Because many people say, I am getting out of the building, I am trying to talk to users, but getting the meetings before you have the tech, finding the right people to talk to, making sure that it's really an urgent pain and a pain that people pay for, and then also having the confidence in the feasibility of the solution. How did all of that come together?
Yeah. So I'll start with kind of the last bit, which is the confidence in the feasibility of the solution. Um, I'm an engineer, and my co-founders are all engineers, and I think that the instinct is to just keep building stuff. But realistically, if you're an experienced engineer, you probably have a very good sense for what you can do, right? It doesn't mean that this project is going to take 1 month or 2 months or whatever. But you should kind of understand, okay, I think there's a valid approach here. If there are fundamental technical questions about whether or not you can build the thing that you want to build, um, those may be good to address, but you should still try to address them as quickly as possible, which is really something we did in the first few weeks. Like we sat down and we built a prototype and we figured out, okay, the technology fundamentally works. We're confident we can build this. Clearly, there's a lot of infra to build out, but this is it's an engineering problem. It's not a research problem. And so that's sort of that part there. Like if you have a technical team and they're confident they can build something, they're probably right. That might take longer to ship than you want. In terms of going out and talking to users, this can be kind of tough. So generally speaking, people are nice, and I think again, if you're an engineer and you're used to engineering culture where people are very direct and blunt, and if you have a bad idea on a technical level, people will tell you it's a bad idea. If you're going out into the real world and you're talking to, not your colleagues on a team, um, no one is going to tell you that your baby is ugly, or that they, don't want to use this. Everyone's probably going to say, "Oh yeah, like that seems like a great idea." So you need a little bit more of a commitment than that. In our case, it was getting people to send over data and getting high level people to actually take meetings, right? Like if you're meeting with the CTO of a big company or the head of data of a big company, that's someone who their calendar is probably full. They probably don't take a lot of random meetings, so they really are investing time. If you're a B2C product, the more classic things are: will people sign up with a credit card? Will people give you an email and respond to a newsletter? Uh, will people show up for stuff in person? Is a really good test, right? Again, it depends on what you're working on, but you want something more than a like, your friend or your, family friend saying like, "Oh yeah, that idea seems cool. I think we would totally be interested." And then that is the extent of the engagement.
Got it. That makes sense. So it sounds like it does sound like your experience, like you've been through IC in the past, you've tried to run different startups in the past. Um, what are the don'ts that you learned, the most critical don'ts or failures that you've been through that have helped you for Espresso AI?
So the motto of YC is make something people want. And we just did kind of the opposite of that in the first startup. We made some really nice software that a few people were very excited about, but were not willing to pay a large amount of money for. And most people just were not that interested. So for context, my first startup was building something to automate spreadsheets. We, as a company called Data Nitro, we were building out a Python integration for Excel. And as engineers, we thought this would be great. And then the reality of the market was most people who use spreadsheets are not programmers and are not interested in learning how to program. Um, but we were two founders just out of college, and very few people were willing to say, "Oh yeah, this is a terrible idea. No one in our company is going to use it." Right? It was always like, "Well, I could see maybe how this would be useful. Let me pass you off to someone else," and then the other person would never respond. So yeah, just go out and validate your idea. Um, a good framework for this is just kind of de-risking your business model, right? And so this is like fairly common advice, but the job of an early stage startup is to de-risk the idea that you have, and you can de-risk it technically by building stuff. But if you are a good engineer and you're working with good engineers, you probably have a great idea of what you can build already, right? If you're OpenAI and you're trying to build AGI, that's all a technical problem. And so there's a huge amount of research to do there. And it's a little bit different. But if you're building a B2B product or a B2C product, the much more difficult part of the risk to assess is product market fit. And so early on, your job is always what is the minimal thing we can build to drive value, to validate our hypothesis that someone cares about what we're building and that this is something that, is going to scale and is either going to have many, many millions of users in B2C, or in, B2B is something that large companies are going to want to pay substantial amounts of money for.
Makes sense. Um, it does sound like you have a clear framework and clear state of mind to always validate that MVP. I do know that a lot of startups out there, I think they get the idea, but when it comes to practicality, it's difficult to always have in your mind, okay, we're on experiment number one, we're running this for a month, here's the deadline, go or no go. Let's toss the baby out every single time again and again and again. Do you feel like you've built that muscle where it's easy for you to pivot and constantly validate hypotheses?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my case, it's less muscle and more scar tissue. Like I've spent a lot of time writing really good, well engineered systems that just were not impactful and that no one used. And so you do that a few times, and on time number four, it's just like, I would really love to run this experiment in 2 weeks instead of 6 months. So uh, it's hard to internalize this, I think, without having been through it for a lot of engineers. But the sooner you run the experiment, the better.
I like that. So we're in the age of AI. It's harder to create a moat. A lot of apps out there are just a wrapper for ChatGPT. What are your thoughts on that and your approach as an AI first company?
Yeah, so I think this is actually something we're doing quite differently, which is AI is a fundamental part of our product. I think it is really what makes it possible for us to get much better results than pre-existing tools and previous approaches. But there's a lot of infrastructure that we're building to deliver the value directly to the user. So the way that Espresso works is it takes about 10 minutes to set up. and then your bill goes down. And for some of our customers, their bill is going down by more than 50%. So this is, really significant, 6, 7 figures of savings. And that was just a lot of regular engineering effort. It's understanding what is the ideal user experience, which for us is sort of push a button and get back a bunch of money. And how do we build out the full product there? And there's kind of an alternative version of our product, which I think is the more common approach in the space, which would be, okay, well, we've built a model that can optimize code. We are going to launch a Copilot tool. And this is going to be a tool that sits in VS Code, and you type in a slow query, and it spits back a faster version of that query. This would be way easier to build. This would, involve much more just Gen AI work. But I think it's a lot less valuable to the end user. There's a ton more manual work involved. It's much harder to quantify the ROI. And it's just a worse experience. So I think in general, if you're building a Gen AI enabled tool, especially if you're not innovating on the underlying models, really think about how do you go the extra mile to make that super, super useful to your users? How do are there any steps you can automate? Is there software you can build to do everything that the user would otherwise have to do by hand? Can you validate your results for the user so that they don't have to spot check for hallucinations and things like that? I'm hoping that there will be a lot more tools like this. It definitely takes more time to build, right? There's still all of the enterprise software that you need to build around that. But I think it's ultimately much more compelling. And a good way to figure out if your product is on the more compelling side of this is just what's the ROI argument for your user? Especially this is true for B2B companies. Is it that you have a chat GPT wrapper and it maybe makes someone more efficient at part of their job? Or can you point to something else and say, here's a process that used to take 10 hours and you had to do it all the time. And concretely, like you get the final, formatted output in 30 seconds or something.
So it's more about just solving that pain and then figuring out how do we find the solution that can solve that pain. It could be a wrapper, but usually if you want it to be more meaningful, then it would be some sort of innovation beyond the wrapper.
Yeah, exactly. And the other, another way to think about this is what's going to be left of your business model when GPT-5 comes out, right? If it's, not much because GPT-5 can just do it and they, have their questions answered in a different text box, you should probably think harder about what the integrations look like, what the user experience is going to look like.
I mean, it is hard to predict what GPT-5 will be like, right? There are those that also claim that we're hitting a ceiling with LLMs and we're not really managing to break boundaries that much anymore. So I don't really know what to expect. Like on the other hand, you could say it's just gonna explode and nothing we build anymore is gonna have that much of an impact.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's the idea that GPT-5 is just going to be a little bit of a better GPT-4, and you don't need to worry about it. There's the idea that GPT-5 or GPT-6 is going to be AGI, and it'll just be able to do everything for you and build all the infra for itself, and we'll all be out of jobs. But I think there's a middle point where you can imagine that you know to pick one specific example, if you're doing some sort of internal document search product with RAG and you're, fixing hallucinations or something, but it's ultimately just kind of a wrapper around feeding some documents into an LLM and having people interact in natural language. That's something that feels like, okay, GPT-5 might just get you all of that for free by having a really long context window or some sort of built-in memory. And, then the chat UI is right there, right? So instead of, you know, helping an internal organization and do like an interactive Q&A, can you maybe just do the entire job? If their job is to, I don't know, produce some sort of report, can you automate the report in a way that fits seamlessly into the entire system? This is like a very off the cuff example. It's not necessarily a good business, but I think that there's room to take that text output and do something more compelling with it.
Got it. So besides the phase of validation, what do you think is working well in Espresso as a company for growth, getting those first customers, um, perhaps different assets, website, the way you talk to people, community, metrics? How do you look at things?
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of things that have been really helpful. One thing in particular, as we've been doing more sales, that I've noticed is I have asked, 10 people for sales advice, and I've gotten 10 different answers about here are the channels that work. Here's what you should be doing. Someone recommended I go on a lot of podcasts, for example. Um, and we're still sort of figuring that out. But something that has been super helpful for us is in person events. There's a big Snowflake conference once a year, which is almost definitionally a gathering of a huge number of people in our target market. And there are smaller Snowflake events. So going and talking to people in person about your product, I think, is extremely valuable. Um, if you're building something and there's a natural gathering of a large number of your users, there's probably nothing more important that you can be doing for your company than going there and just talking to people. And like the first conference I went to was a month into our startup. I had a prototype that was just like spitting out some optimized queries into a shell on my laptop, and I just talked to a bunch of people. I talked to maybe like 100 people over the course of 3 or 4 days. It was exhausting, and 30 or 40 of those people were really interested and either were the person I should be talking to at their company or knew who to introduce me to. Um, and like a number of those people ended up joining our beta and ended up becoming customers. Um, Past that, I think just running lots of experiments with how to reach people. So understanding what the baseline is for, sending outbound emails, doing marketing, hosting local events, whatever it is. Like just like with the rest of the startup, run the experiments, understand what the metrics look like, and like double down on the good approaches.
So, what what kind of challenges are you facing now? What metrics do you feel could be better? Um,
Yeah. We are, I think, comfortably post product market fit. There's definitely a ton of interest. So it's, all like very good problems to have. But where I would like to do better is, I mean, one is there's a lot of great technology that we're still working on for the product. So today we're saving people, you know, anywhere between kind of 20 and 70% on their costs. And I'm excited to get the low end of that. And obviously, like the 70% is not going to get much better, but I'm excited to get the 20% of that to 40 or 50% plus across the board. And I think that that's going to be a really exciting series of features and improvements for our customers. But on the sales side of things, it's really about scaling the process and getting it to be faster and more consistent. So I am currently spending, all day, every day buried in my inbox, just trying to get back to leads in a timely fashion. And yeah, we're working on tooling to make that better. The way that we talk to customers is we grab their data and send back an estimate of how much money we can save them. So this has been a really extremely helpful sales tool. But it is some technical work per user. It takes a little bit of time to turn around. And ideally we'd get from that being a day long process to something where you can go on the site, upload some data and instantly get a result back.
Is it one of those high level tools, or is the result they get relatively realistic?
It's extremely realistic. And I think this is another example of really putting in the effort to go the extra mile for a good user experience. So we put in a lot of effort to be able to give a realistic estimate up front, as well as help people understand on an ongoing basis how much we are saving them. In fact, one of the parts of our product that's been helpful is just how we charge. So we charge back a percentage of savings, and this is like from many perspectives kind of a terrible plan for the business. So it's hard to understand, how much money we are going to be making off any given user. It varies with their usage and their own internal optimizations. It makes when we eventually have a CFO, I'm sure it's going to be an interesting challenge to understand what is going on with our business and what that might look like moving forward. But it's great for our customers, and that's really the most important thing. It's a no-brainer. It's guaranteed ROI whether you're a large Snowflake user or a small Snowflake user. And it incentivizes us to just save people as much money as we possibly can. So I think customers feel more confident that we're building the right thing and that we're, building with their interests in mind.
What I really like and what I'm sensing about you and Espresso and your experiences and the way things are built is that oftentimes advice that people give in marketing or in sales to get more leads or to get people to use your product or to sell more is to lead with value, right? So you start with that standard freemium, you start with something where you're not getting enough traffic and enough leads. And then you brainstorm how can we give a little snippet of value. But to me, it sounds like in your process, it's already baked in. Like how can we make this a no-brainer for potential customers? And I really like that. And it's also very, very hard to do because if everyone was doing it the right way, I don't think you'd be seeing 90% of startups failing, right? Like first they build the wrong thing. And then, or maybe they did build the right thing, but the funnel isn't good. But here from the beginning, it seems to me like, hey, it is a no-brainer. We're here to save you money. It helps us. It helps you. It's a win-win situation. So I really like that.
Yeah, I think it's been great. Obviously, it's we're really fortunate in a couple ways. One is because we're saving people significant amounts of money, it's really easy to do that ROI calculation. I think for a lot of products, it's significantly more difficult to connect value to revenue. Two is like the economic climate has changed. A few years ago, no one cared about saving money. And I think this product would have been significantly harder to sell in 0% interest rate land. So there's macroeconomic stuff going on as well that makes us more relevant. But I think many businesses, especially businesses run by technical people who are excited about the underlying technology, just having a really crisp explanation you can give, the canonical like elevator pitch of what does your product do and why, and why should I care, is super important, right? I've been to a bunch of events with other founders giving talks and presenting their product to corporate buyers, and especially for AI products, it's very common to have a 10 or 15-minute presentation where you're halfway in and I'm still hearing about features of the product and not specifically what it could do, or how it might be better than a ChatGPT Plus subscription. So, if you can't explain to your target audience what your product does in one sentence, you should probably really think about what it is that you're working on.
I completely agree. Um, are there any last tips for founders starting out early on, perhaps to help them prevent some of the mistakes that you've made?
Yeah. I think a lot of early startup failures are own goals. And one in particular is it's really easy to fool yourself into thinking that people are interested in what you're building. And this is a little bit hard to explain because I think it's, how do you know when people are really interested? Right. Like, I think it's along the lines of like, oh, well, how do you know when you're really in love? How do you know this is really the one? Right. Like, it's just, it's a very, very different experience. And, other than going and, building something that, having the luck of eventually finding something that people are really interested in, um, you could maybe just assume that your first couple ideas are bad, and if everyone has the same reaction to your current idea as they did to your first one, it's probably not what you're looking for. To give another really brief example there, at the end of my last startup, the Excel spreadsheet optimization thing or automation thing, one of the things we built was something that just made spreadsheets faster. And my co-founder and I, this was like at the end of a 2-year slog. We were burnt out. We did not see how that would be a big business, but that's actually something that resonated. I had people following up for years. Like, we had put, I think, one demo on Hacker News once. And for years, I would get emails of like, oh, how's that demo going? Like, when is this going to be available? When is this going to be released? And by the end of it, I was like, the company is defunct. You can go to our website. It's clearly not there. Like, how did you even hear about this? But people were really, really interested. Um, the other analogy that I use for our product is, think about the reaction you would have to a friend who is, kind of pitching you, hey, I built an app that can, help you split your bills with your roommates, or something. One of these really generic ideas, but you can do it with AI, versus like, hey, I built an app that can save you 50% on your rent, right? Like, that's, you'd follow up with that, right? You would, if it seemed like a, credible person who was doing it, you'd follow up and you'd say, hey, I would really love to know how to not pay half my rent every month. How's that coming along? Like, where's it going? Because it's immediately a ton of value to you. So that's, ideally, that's the kind of reaction you want to see from people you're talking to early, before you sit down and commit to building something. The last thing I'll say is, if your roadmap to your MVP is like, we need like 5 engineers to work for 6 to 12 months, like, you need to think harder about what your MVP should look like. It should be something you can iterate on the order of weeks. And it could be, you're just looking for a reaction, right? It can be wireframes. It can be a very quick website. If it's really something that is technically infeasible to build in a reasonable amount of time, just tell people that you have it and that you're signing them up for a beta. Um, and see who's interested before you invest the time and the engineering effort, because it is much better to spend 6 months trying, 15 different ideas than building out one thing in detail.
That is some great advice, Ben. I think that I learned a ton. It's great having you on the show. How can people find you and Espresso?
Yeah, we are espresso.ai. You can reach me at ben@espresso.ai. If you or someone you know is suffering from overly high Snowflake bills, please reach out. We can help.
Thanks so much, Ben.